it's leaking from the top down. And I think, from what I did when I cleaned it off, it's leaking from up there. There's like a, I don't know what you call it, but a hex-headed cap with a seal on the side of the steering box. I think it's leaking down. And of course, it's dripping on the garage. It's not gushing, but it's a decent amount. Two important things while doing this job. One is that once you've disconnected the steering shaft from the steering coupler on the steering gearbox, you'll want to make sure that the wheel is not turned left or right, because if you do that, you'll wreck the clock spring. That's what the factory service manual says anyway. So take the key out of the ignition when you start this job with the wheel centered and allow it to lock using the steering wheel lock. Now there's of course some play, but yeah, you can see it. I just locked it. The other thing is to fully extend the adjustable steering column, assuming your car was equipped with that. I don't know if all R129s had this option, but mine does. And there's a little switch, if you weren't aware, under the steering column for extending it out all the way. So make sure to do that when starting this job as well. This quick jack's amazing. And back it off on the mechanical locks. Boom. Drop the under tray by removing the bolts that hold it on. There's 4 of them. One there, two back there. Alright, so here's the center link. Here's the steering damper. And everything's interconnected with the steering box right there. And that turns this arm, which then connects to the tie rod on that wheel. And the idler arm there connects to the same center link, which then connects to the tie rod for the other side. And what seems to be happening when the actual weight of the car is on the ground with the wheels, there's kind of a loud popping and knock from this driver's side of the car. So I don't know if it's the center link, which I don't know how much play should be on one of these, but this seems awfully loose. Plus the boot's torn, so realistically this should probably be replaced. I was able to figure out that the knocking that I feel and hear when I turn the wheel just off center, left or right, when the car is off the ground, is not, I don't think, the center link, this part here. Even though it seems kind of loose, and there's a tear in the boot. But what I saw a guy did to check is he pulled up and down vertically to see how much vertical play was in the ball joints at either end of this. And on mine, there really isn't any, like there was in his. And it is slight, but what actually I noticed has up and down play is this particular ball joint on the inner tie rod. You can't see much, but you can feel it. And so it would explain now why the knock feels isolated to this side where things connect up to the steering box and the steering shaft. So when the steering is turning on the ground, this is under a lot of strain, so that little bit of play reverberates up through the steering linkage. So realistically what I should do and what I will do is replace both inner and outer tie rods on both sides. You're gonna have to align it anyway, so might as well just do both. And since this thing is floppy and has the torn boot, I'll replace that. And see what the steering damper costs, because might as well just do all these components at once and then get the car aligned. But yeah, so don't just look for play here on the center link, up and down. Pull up and down on the ball joint for your tie rods on both sides, and feel for that kind of knocking play. So to remove the steering box, you'll have to disconnect both the tie rod for the driver's side as well as the center link from the pitman arm on the bottom of the steering box. And to do that, you'll need pullers for the tie rod as well as the center link. And for the tie rod disconnection, this tool, which you can rent at AutoZone, I'll grab the part number for you, but it's somewhat of a generic style of tie rod puller, similar to the one in the factory manual for Mercedes. But anyway, you'll use that, and of course each of the nuts holding these tie rod ends on have a Allen in the center. So once you get the nut there spun loose, if the shaft to the ball joint there spins as you're trying to loosen the nut, you can hold that that shaft to the ball joint steady with a 5mm Allen key while you use a 19mm wrench to take off that nut. So first thing I'm going to do is use an electric impact to just bust loose those nuts. And then if need be, stick an Allen key and use a box wrench to get the nut completely off so that I can install my puller easily. Alright, so I took off the 19mm nut, securing the tie rod to the pitman arm. Now I installed the tie rod puller and left the nut off the shaft of the tie rod because this tool has like a little centering cup that helps it stay on the shaft, and with that nut on there it causes it to kind of walk off as you're tightening it. So I've left the nut off and it'll just press against the shaft directly, and then the ears will grab onto the bottom side of the, or the top side of the pitman arm here, and help to push this out. So it's a little hard to do this while holding the camera, so I'm going to stick my wrench on there and slowly pop it out. I would wear safety glasses while doing this in case something pops, or who knows, this cast tool breaks, whatever. There's a lot of pressure going here, so please be careful. And sure enough, just like that, didn't really take too much trouble. Granted, this is a rust-free car, but that just popped right out with the puller tool. Not much effort. So now we're going to see if the other tool I rented will work on removing the center link, or drag link as it's called, from the pitman arm. The trick is you don't have, let's see if I can, you don't have a lot of room up here, so you need a compact tool where you don't have a big shaft sticking up on that side. Definitely need a special tool, and I'll show what I'm going to try in a moment. Okay, so for detaching the center link on the driver's side from the pitman arm, what I used was a stubby wrench, and then 19mm, of course, and then used a hammer to tap it to turn that nut off up top counterclockwise, because I could not get a long handle box wrench on this, and I couldn't get a socket and ratchet up there, and this worked best. So anyway, now that I got the nut loose, I should be able to take it off. Well, I'll probably need to use the wrench for a bit, like this. And maybe have to use an Allen key to keep the shaft of the center link from spinning because it is a ball joint there, just like any other. And then use the special puller that's a little bit different due to the limited space up there. So I'll show that next. So here's the style of press or puller, whatever you want to call it, that I'm going to use to remove the center link, drag link from the pitman arm. And so the part with the bolt with the head sticking down is of course going to face towards the garage floor, and then this top part with what I'll call the tongue will press down on the shaft of the center link going up through the pitman arm, and then the two ears on the bottom will brace against the bottom side of the pitman arm. And so as I tighten the bolt, it's going to press the center link down through the pitman arm to detach it. And once I get this mounted up, I'll show you how it's going to work. This is looking in through the wheel well, but you can see how the tongue is going to be pressing down on that top part of the shaft of the center link that comes up through the pitman arm. And then the ears are going to grab below on the underside of the pitman arm. And I'm going to be down here cranking on that bolt to compress things. And the tool worked, and with a nice loud bang, boom, the center link is out of the pitman arm of the steering box. And now we'll be doing the disconnection on the other side, because I'm replacing the center link and both tie rod ends and the steering damper in addition to removing the steering box. Now if you're just removing the steering box, you could stop right here as far as disconnecting the center link and tie rod, because the other side, for the passenger side, doesn't need to be disconnected to do the steering box. But again, I'm replacing several components, so I have to do that. Alright, so the tie rod's disconnected from the idler arm here on the passenger side. Now we got to disconnect the center link, drag link, whatever you want to call it, from the idler arm as well. So again, I got that specialized puller. There's not a whole lot of wiggle room up there, so I need to be mindful of that top tab bottoming out on the transmission. I wouldn't want to force it and crack something, so I'm going to pay close attention. I may need to shift the separator tool to allow it to articulate upward and press down over there on the shaft of the center link to pop it out of the idler arm. And to get the nut loose, the one that holds that center link to the idler arm, I used a long 19mm combo wrench. Kind of went in from the wheel well and came over this way, because there's just not enough room to easily get a socket, and using a stubby is a little tricky because you don't have leverage and you can't get a hammer up there to hit it. So long handle 19mm combo wrench is what I used. Alright, now the center link is out of the idler arm on the passenger side. It's basically out of the pitman arm on the driver's side. So the only thing left is to remove that little nut holding the steering damper to the car. And steering damper, of course, is connected here to the center link, so that'll just all come off as one assembly. You're going to want to drain the power steering from the pump reservoir. I'm just using a large syringe made for like basting turkeys and such. Has a nice long needle point that can stick way down in there to get almost all the fluid out of the reservoir. The factory manual says you're supposed to logically disconnect the pressure and return lines of the power steering pump from the steering gear up there. It does suggest, I guess, removing or disconnecting this exhaust section, but I'm going to see if I can do this without that, because once I get these lines off, hopefully don't make too much of a mess, then we can go and disconnect the steering shaft from the steering gear, and then unbolt the steering gear. And since the lines are disconnected, I would think there should be enough room for it to come out without having to remove this exhaust, but we'll see. It's actually easier to see the steering lines connected to the box if you're looking at it from the perspective of the, well, I guess looking towards the driver's side with the passenger side at your back. But yeah, you can see the fitting. It's 19 millimeter, by the way. So there we go. We got the first line detached, and you know, there's a little drippage, but obviously have a drain pan. And then once that first line is detached, we'll go in for the second one. It's a little bit hard to see it, but it's right there next to the one that I took off. All right, so going in through the driver wheel well, we can see now the bolts. There's 1, 2, and then 3. It's kind of hard to see because of the hoses, but there's 3 of them there that hold on the steering box. Now, at the same time, it's ideal not to have the box just hanging on the steering shaft once you unbolt everything. So you're probably going to want to loosen these most of the way and start wiggling the box away from the steering shaft so it comes out fairly clean without just hanging up on the steering shaft and breaking something. No, we're not taking a break for a San Miguel. This is actually a clear beer bottle, and the color that you see it now is the color of the power steering fluid that I pulled out. Actually, it should be ATF fluid, but just to give a sense. So it's fairly dark, and so, you know, best part about doing this job is, of course, they're pretty much flushing the system. I mean, minus what's the residual left in certain parts of the hoses, but pretty much emptying the gearbox and the pump. So anyway, just figured I'd show this as part of the process. And now that we've had a chance to clean this off with brake cleaner, put it on the bench, I can show the part that I believe is leaking, and I believe it's the seal for this little cap. And you know, when this was on the car, I cleaned it off with brake cleaner, let it leak, and it seemed like it was coming from this and then leaking down towards the part that faces towards the ground. So, and it was wet up here, whereas, you know, the part that didn't leak on was dry. So anyway, that was the main reason I went to the trouble of pulling this steering box, was because that seal was leaking, and it was not an insignificant amount, and of course making a mess in the driveway or wherever. So had to be done, and a seal kit was about $70. Pretty much as every seal, if you take this whole thing apart, which I'm going to try to avoid. You know, these steering boxes, I think, you know, are best rebuilt by a professional. I mean, I would just mainly look at taking stuff off that's not requiring any adjustment, replacing whatever seal, and then just putting it back on, calling it good. Because otherwise, there's nothing wrong with the steering box. Works perfect. I wanted to review the fasteners and hardware that I've taken off in this job, where I've taken off both tie rods, the center link, and the steering box. So I think most importantly, the 3 bolts that hold the steering box to the body of the car, which according to the manual are stretch bolts, and it says specifically to replace them when removing and installing the steering box, and I'm going to heed that warning. Next is this bolt and nut combo, which holds the steering damper to the bracket on the center link. And here we have the locking nuts that secure the tie rods to the center links and steering knuckles. And then, of course, we also have the nuts holding the steering box, or I should say the pitman arm, to one tie rod and the idler arm to another tie rod. Let's see, those it's this one here, or these 4 here. These hold this belly pan to the underside of the car. This T40 Torx bolt, machine screw, whatever you want to call it, with blue Loctite, that holds the steering shaft to the I don't know what you'd call it, like the guibo or the connecting piece between the steering box and the steering shaft. And then we have these, which are the wheel bolts for the driver's side wheel. Had a bit of a blank there on that one. But anyway, that's the hardware you're dealing with. And I would say definitely replace the stretch bolts for the steering box. Cost about $40 with pickup at my local dealer. So not too bad. I wanted to show also this steering damper. I mean, I don't see how it can damp anything. I don't know if this is supposed to be like a regular shock absorber, but I don't think that's right. So yeah, besides replacing the center link, I'm replacing the steering damper, as well as both tie rods. So car's got to get aligned afterwards, so I might as well just take care of all of it, give it the, precise German handling it was supposed to have. To rebuild the steering box, reseal it, you're going to need 2 things. You're going to need the seal kit, which is made by Vico. See the Mercedes part number beginning with 129 there. And you'll also need 3 copper crush washers, known in Mercedes world as sealing rings. There's the part number. And I actually bought 3 of them because they're only like $1.14 a piece. And for whatever reason, if I do need to access the region I worked on, it's nice to have backups so you can put a fresh sealing ring when needed. The reason I purchased these separate from the seal kit is because the seal kit did not include them when it should, and the particular spot that it seals is that hex-headed screw plug right there. And on my particular steering box, that was the one part that actually was leaking. And it was a bit frustrating to find that seal kit that cost almost $100 didn't include these seals. But whatever. Just know that you'll need to buy these particular items if you want to do a full reseal on this steering box. All right, so I'm going to start with this, taking off this screw plug and all the stuff under it. 17 millimeters. What I've done is I've taken one of the steering box mounting bolts, screwed it into the side of the steering box so I can hold on to the steering box while I run my ratchet, so this box isn't trying to spin around as I get this out. And here's your screw plug. Put that aside. There's a spring right here. And let's see, I'm just gonna use a pick to grab that little copper sealing ring. There we go. We're gonna actually discard that because we're gonna, as you should always do, use a new one because they will leak. I found trying to use the pick to pull that plunger out was not working, and at the risk of scratching up that, I'm just going to turn this over and see if it falls out. Come on. Ha! There we go. So, that little plunger came out. You can see what that looks like. set that aside with the spring and the screw cap. I'm just going to put the spring and the screw cap together. Now it looks like, according to the parts diagram, there's also another little plunger in here. So I couldn't get the second plunger piece that's deeper in there out. I couldn't get it out, and I wasn't going to risk screwing it up by scratching the bore where the smaller plunger goes in and fighting with it. There's no seals under there, so whatever, that one's staying. But I did replace the copper sealing ring here because that was the leaking part of the steering box. Now technically I could probably just stop here and save this seal kit for future use. It's kind of like deciding what I'm going to do at the moment, because honestly the steering box worked perfectly and had no other leaks, and sometimes, you know what they say, it's best not to fix what ain't broke. Anyway, that's where I'm at. So I've decided to leave well enough alone and just leave everything intact, not take apart this whole thing and replace every seal, because it wasn't leaking out of anywhere but that stupid little copper washer. As much as it was somewhat of a pain to get this off the car, it's not so bad that if I do, knowing my luck, probably spring a leak randomly out of a part I didn't touch right after I start using this on the car again, then so be it. I'll pull it off the car, but it's not worth the higher risk of me taking this apart, fucking something up, and then having to, spend $500 or whatever on a rebuilt steering box. So anyway, yeah, if you need guidance on how to rebuild one of these or take it completely apart and reseal it, I'll link a video in the description of another gentleman who did it on a right-hand drive car, and the process is pretty much the same. But yeah, I'm going to work on getting this back onto the car now. Hopefully that's not too much of a fight, but I'm sure it will be. Oh, and by the way, the 3 bolts that mount the steering box to the car are stretch bolts according to the factory manual, and it says to replace them when you reinstall it. So there's your part number. You'll need 3 of them. They're about $13 each at my local Mercedes dealer, so not too bad. Other stuff like self-fastening nuts or self-locking bolts for the steering box, like holding it together, I wouldn't have replaced those. I wouldn't worry about it, but since these are stretch bolts, I think it's worth $40. All right, so we got the 3 stretch bolts in place. What I'm going to do is go around to the other side and actually push them so the tips of those bolts are just flush with the body. So that way, when I put the steering box up there, I can just push around from the other side and not slide the bolts in, but thread them in easier. And hopefully get one started and screwed in a decent amount, and then use that to kind of hold the box in place while I wiggle the others and get them threaded in, because the way this bolts up, the actual steering box is threaded, so it's got to be real straight and flush against the side of the car in order to bolt it in. And the other thing is, I think the best way to position the steering box to get it back up there is up on its end like this. So then you'll lift it up like, with this part where my hand is facing up, and then turn it or rotate it. Well, that's not quite the rotation I meant, but basically lift it up vertically, then once you get it up in there in the cavity, turn it horizontal so you can bolt it in. This may end up being a 2-person job given how heavy that is, but we'll see. So here's the bolts looking at the other side. You can see them right there. I've pushed them flush against the body of the car. Now I'm going to lift the steering box vertically up and rotate it horizontally so that I can slide it into the steering shaft, then bolt it up. It's really kind of one of those multi-handed moves, but anyway, you got to be gentle on that steering shaft right there. You can't be rocking the heavy box and, you know, wailing on that, so just be careful. Alright, well, it is not too difficult to wrestle it up there. What I suggest is, once you get it up there, slip the steering shaft into the input shaft of the steering box, then start like one of the bottommost bolts that holds the steering box to the car. And you got to be careful so you don't strip out the threads on the steering box. But once you get that first bolt started, well, then you can just slowly hand tighten it while wiggling the steering box to keep it straight, and essentially kind of pull the steering box up against the body of the car, and then pretty much have things lined up to thread in the other two bolts. And then once you do that, it'll be bolting the steering shaft to the input shaft with that little lock bolt with the blue Loctite, which I'm going to do next. For perspective, there's that little screw cap that was leaking because of that stupid copper washer. And it almost makes me question if I could have probably replaced it without taking the steering box, but I don't know if there was enough room to move that cap, and, you know, at the time I didn't know what was under it, but regardless, there is that little screw cap. And to actually tighten that first of two lines, you're going to use a 17mm crow's foot. This is actually part of a metric crow's foot set specifically for fittings, which works great, of course, since we're tightening power steering fittings. I didn't actually use a torque wrench to tighten these down properly. I think hand tightening is probably a safe bet, and I'm also using a flexi ratchet, but again, that'll help you get up in there and tighten these down with some good leverage. Right, so I got that first line just started on there, and the best tip that I have is to use your right hand and like stick your fingers through the loop-de-loop there on the line to hold it up against the fitting, and then use your left hand and use that to get the nut for that fitting started. That line is a little bit of a stretch to get up there, so you definitely need to hold it with your right hand kind of up and centered to get it into the fitting while turning the nut with your left hand. And I would venture this is a pretty hard job if you have large hands. And then you have your 19mm fitting for the I believe that'd be the return low pressure line back to the power steering pump. Now the tricky thing is connecting both of these relies on the position of the pitman arm, just to get room to slip things in as you're putting back things together. So I had to turn the wheel all the way to the right, which moves the pitman all the way to the left, and that created enough space to get that center link and tie rod in. It's a little bit of fidgeting, but again, just as long as you adjust that position of the pitman arm as you're trying to fit things together, you'll be solid. The final step of this is going to be filling and bleeding the power steering system before you turn the car on and try to use power steering. So what you'll want to do, take the cap off there and pour in ATF fluid, and actually I'm just using like a Dexron MERC type ATF for the power steering system. And I used, let's say, about a quart to fill the system. And while you're slowly pouring in that ATF fluid, you'll want an assistant inside the car turning the wheels left and right, lock to lock. And what that's going to do is suck down the power steering fluid into the box. And as they keep turning the wheel, it's going to also push up air and fluid back into the reservoir. And you'll eventually reach a point, assuming you have no leaks, where you're only pumping power steering fluid from the pump reservoir down to the box and back up to the box, and there's no more air in the system, because like any hydraulic system, you cannot have air in the system. And you're going to want the car off the ground, at least both front wheels, while you're doing this. the fluid level too should be left where you're, at the max for the cold section of the stick when you're done bleeding the system. So you may need to remove a little excess power steering fluid after you're done bleeding, and that's okay. But the big thing is make sure before you turn on the car to get the level on this right, so you don't, have this over or underfilled after bleeding. And then after you've fully bled the system and made sure your level is correct, you can go ahead and start the car and check for leaks.